Hey everybody, it's Jim. Welcome back to my channel. I am back today with a new video all about writing and publishing. I thought I'd talk briefly about the different levels of editing and proofreading available to a writer, and this is useful for whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction or RPG game material. I mean, literally anything. I think these terms are relevant to any work that you're doing. My philosophy is that every writer needs an editor who isn't themselves, and every editor needs a proofreader who isn't themselves. Right? I can edit my own stuff up to a point, but I need another set of eyes to look at it. I can proofread my stuff up to a point, but I need a fresh set of eyes to look at it, whether I'm editing or writing. So I really recommend if you are indie publishing, build in some sort of budget or set up some sort of system of bartering or or trade. Trade writing for editing or artwork for editing. Like figure out a way to afford in some broad spectrum of affording, whether it's money or something else. To get somebody to edit your work, edit or proofread or something, right? To get a fresh set of eyes on it, to look at it, to make any changes that you need to make sure that you're producing the best quality thing that you can produce in that moment, right? Like, I mean, hopefully we're all lifelong learners. You're always going to improve your work, and hopefully you will need less of an editor down the road than you need right now, and it'll be useful for you to learn from professionals. Yeah, that's why you hire professionals, is to learn from them, so they'll edit your work or they'll proofread your work, and then and then go from there. So there are a lot of terms for editing and proofreading out there in the big the big bad world, and I've heard different people call different levels of editing different things. So it's a little complicated, or not complicated, but it becomes complicated because people have their own opinions, and different places use different terms, and then you've got each professional companies often have their own style guides and their own terminology and stuff. So I'm just trying to give you my perspective. This is certainly not the way it is. This is not the only way. But this is what I've been familiar with in decades of writing, publishing, and being involved in various and sundry publishing companies. This is what I'm familiar with. It may be different to you, and that's totally okay. Hopefully, you'll get the gist of what we're talking about here. But yeah, so let's say you're a writer and you've got yourself a manuscript, whether it's a short story or a novella or a full novel. Maybe you've even got a series, or you are a nonfiction writer. Maybe you're writing a nonfiction book or essay or something, or maybe you're a game designer, game developer, game writer, and you have a supplement or a game product or something that needs to be edited. You've gone through the manuscript, you've worked on the manuscript. Now you have a manuscript, final manuscript that's ready to be edited by somebody else who isn't you. So there are some different levels of editing. Let's talk about editing first versus proofreading and other services that you can talk about. So the high level, top level one that I'm the most familiar with in terminology is developmental editing. I've also heard it called structural editing. This is kind of the big picture thing. This is where somebody, where you go to somebody, and they take your manuscript. Let's talk for let's say it's a novel, for instance, right? So you have a novel, and they're going to read it from a big picture point of view. Like, does this make sense, right? Does it fit the genre? Or is what you're promising what you're delivering? Are there any huge gaps in logic or sense? Does things flow understandably from one place to another? Like big picture stuff, like that. Not getting down into the weeds of the sentences and the words, but like big picture. Does this thing work? Right? Does this thing work for what you're trying to accomplish with it? This is where you might even have a concept or an outline, right? Or pieces of a concept and an outline, and you're like, I got 80% of the story here. I don't know where I'm going with the rest of it. I need help filling in the blanks. Now, for me personally, as an editor, I tend to leave that to the writer, because ultimately it's your story, it's your book, it's your thing. You should be deciding what what the story is and where it's going and what it should be from this level of a perspective, right? Because as an editor, I want you to shine. I want your story to shine. I don't want to impose my concepts and thoughts and will on it for you, because it's yours, right? It's not mine. I got my own stuff to write, right? I don't want to write your stuff too, or at least give you high level concepts too. Certainly a developmental editor or a structural editor will look at it and say, might offer a lot of commentary in the manuscript to say, this isn't really hitting the genre. Maybe you might want to think about this. You might want to think about that. You're already leaning into one genre. Maybe you should go all the way into that genre, or maybe you should pull back some of the elements. Like, I don't know, maybe you're writing a urban fantasy, but you have a lot of romance elements in it. Maybe you want to lean more toward romantasy or something, a different subgenre, or maybe strip out some of it so that you're more leaning toward a different genre. That's where developmental editing, structural editing will help you. Again, this is all big picture stuff. So this is if you are early in your writing career and you don't really have a sense of how to wrap your head around the totality of a novel, or like a big story, like a big series, or a big project, having a developmental edit might help help you refine some of those concepts and ideas, so that you can get confident with where you're going with it, and then start breaking it down and then going off and writing confidently in that. So that's a developmental edit. If you are going to an editor with a manuscript in hand, and you ask them for a developmental editor, and you're expecting to get lots of line edits, like fixing commas and fixing words and moving paragraphs around, you're going to be probably disappointed to get the feedback from the developmental editor, because that's not really what they're there for, right? So that's why it's important to understand the different levels of editing. So developmental edit, 10,000 foot view, big picture. Here's the whole, how the whole thing looks, how the whole thing's working out, and then you go from there. Once you've got that figured out, like whether you're at a certain point in your writing career, you understand that concept, and you've got a really solid manuscript, what it is from beginning to end, you're happy with it, you might go to a substantive edit next. A substantive edit, there's been a lot of, in my experience, there's been some blurring of lines between substantive editing, line editing, and even copy editing. It's all kind of squishy depending on which editor you're talking to, and there's lots of editors, right? We all have our opinions. But so substantive editing is a really deep dive into the manuscript, where you are looking at everything from a high, still you're kind of at a high level point of view, but you're not getting down into the weeds about sentences and commas and semicolons versus em dashes versus n dashes, etc. You're looking at like content, right? Like, does this paragraph make sense here, or does it make more sense over here? Does this word, does this whole subplot fit here, or is it better for pacing? Does it fit better somewhere else? Again, with fiction, I try to be really careful, because I don't want to mess with the writer's voice, right, and the writer's intentions. Like, maybe you've got an interesting story going on, and you flop point of views a couple times, and then you go back and forth in the timeline, where reading it maybe doesn't make sense, but once I get the context, maybe it does make sense. Maybe that was your intention, was to make it different and interesting, and then we get into it as we go. So that's where it's really important to have a good working relationship between the writer and the editor, whatever level of editing you're going for, just so that we can get on the same page, and talk about it. But substantive editing is really about taking the manuscript and moving the parts around and refining the parts of it, so that it's in a place that's smooth, easy to read, comprehensible, and is delivering what the writer intends. Right, the writer might have an intention about what they want the book to be, or the manuscript to be, and may have gotten lost along the way. Right, I mean, I do that plenty of times. I'll have a concept for a project, and I'll get into it, and then halfway through it's like, oh, I'm moving in this direction a little bit, and I got to come back to the true north, or to the North Star. And that's where a substantive editor can help, if they understand your goal, your end goal, and then they can help you get that manuscript to that point, if it's not already there, depending on where you are in your writing career. So substantive editing, still kind of big picture stuff, but it's really moving the pieces around to bring that picture that you have in mind into focus. And then we get into line editing. Line editing, from everything I've experienced, is kind of the traditional idea of what people think of editing. Is you're going into the manuscript, you're cleaning up typos, you're fixing punctuation, you're following the writer's style guide or the house style guide, whatever style guide is appropriate. And that's to say, style guide is, it'll tell you what to capitalize, what not to capitalize, what kind of terms you're using, especially in nonfiction, like for game writing. Every game has its own style guide and list of terms that we use. Like, for example, Star Trek Adventures, we don't capitalize certain terms. We do capitalize other terms, like momentum, threat, determination. Those are capitalized. Game elements like attributes, departments, values, focuses, we don't capitalize those, and we have to be consistent. We try to be consistent from book to book to book. And so we have a style guide that we give to our editors and our proofreaders and say, okay, here's the manuscript from the writer. Most of the time the writers follow style guide, sometimes they don't, but that's not entirely up to them. Like, ideally a writer would follow the style guide, but they're focused on the creative, like writing the words thing, and the style guide can be applied later. And as a writer, like if you're writing your own fiction, it's useful, if you think to do it, is to start compiling your own style guide, especially with like science fiction and fantasy, where you've got really interesting names of characters, locations, etc., with your apostrophes and your hyphens and your dashes and all that great stuff. It's useful to write that down so that we know, the editor or proofreader will know, okay, this word means this in the context of this story, so I need to be consistent. Anytime that word shows up, it needs to be spelled exactly the way it's spelled in the style guide, with capital, apostrophe, capital, or apostrophe, capital, lowercase, etc. Like, whatever your style is, whatever you want that word to be looking like on the page, that's what we want to apply to it in a line edit. We're trying to make sure that the manuscript is grammatically correct, with a caveat, and then that it also adheres to the style guide that the writer or the house, publishing house, wants to use. And that caveat I was talking about is, of course, there are grammar rules. We've got the whole Chicago manual style. We've got, Strunk and White. We've got everybody else that tells us how English, in this case, is written, and there are rules. But writers have the ability and the right to change those rules or ignore those rules if they want. Like, if you don't want to use Oxford commas in your manuscript, great, tell your editor, because otherwise your editor might put them in, because that's just how a lot of us think. If you want to use hyphens instead of em dashes for everything, great, okay, that's a choice. And then just tell us, because what's really important in an edit is that your manuscript is consistent, right? So, make a choice for whatever stylistic thing you want to do, but be consistent throughout the book, unless there's a really good reason in the book to not be consistent. I don't know that I have an example that I can think of where we chose to do something one way and then changed it in the middle of this manuscript. Like Oxford comma. Like, maybe you want the first half of the book using the Oxford comma and the other half not, because something happened in the book that would change that, and you're getting into the meta of the book. I don't know. I'm just throwing ideas out there, but in general, we try to be consistent from the beginning to the end with comma usage or hyphen usage or punctuation or set-isms or adverbs, etc. Just like whatever that stuff is, have that conversation with your editor, and if you're an editor, have that conversation with your writers, so that we know what you want to be presented on the page, right? So that's line editing. Line editing is pretty time and labor intensive, or it can be, because we are really focusing on everything as much as possible. We're trying to get that prose or the text or whatever into a really nice, clean shape so that it's easy to read and it's delivering the message that you want it to deliver. That you want to deliver. And then copy editing. Copy editing it's kind of this fourth level of editing. Again, it does get squishy with line editing and copy editing. Copy editing, in my experience, you're not worrying about the big picture. You're not worrying about the sentences and the paragraphs being in the right place. Copy editing is all about going sentence to sentence and paragraph to paragraph, making sure that it is grammatically correct, spelling's correct, all that stuff. Like, really getting down into the technical weeds. That you're creating really clean copy, basically, right? So there's some wiggle wiggle room and or I mean this overlap between line editing and copy editing. Just in my brain, think of line editing as a much detailed dig into the manuscript, whereas a copy edit is you know, we're looking at each line, making sure it's, you know, correct in and of itself, but also correct within the context of the paragraph or the scene or chapter that it's part of. And that's true for nonfiction and fiction. Of course, you know, nonfiction has different styles and different rules in some cases. Editing a game book like Star Trek Adventures is different than editing a piece of fiction, just because there's different things to think about and to worry about. Copy editing is also where we would, where I or we or like a copy editor would probably be making sure, especially in a nonfiction book or like a game book, which, you know, are functionally nonfiction for the most part. You're looking at all the stuff on the page, right? You're looking at the headers, you're looking at the footers, you're looking at the sidebars, you're looking at like all the different elements that go into a book, into a page, and making sure that they're all accurate and correct and consistent from beginning to end. And that can take a lot of work. Again, that takes a lot of work as well. I use checklists. I think in one of my other videos I mentioned the self-editing for fiction writers book, which is great because it has checklists in it about different things to check at each stage. And then also for like the Star Trek Adventures and Fallout work I do, I have a big checklist, a big proofreading and copy editing checklist of all the different things that I need to go through to make sure that the book is right. And it gets down, I mean, it really gets down into the weeds, right? It especially once you go from a manuscript to a layout, right? Once the book, once the manuscript goes from like a Word document or a Google document or a Scrivener document, and it gets turned into InDesign or whatever design program you're using to convert the text into a pretty layout that can be turned into a printed book or digital book, whichever. Lots of things have to be looked at, right? The alignment of text, the placement of stuff on the page, headers, footers, different heading levels, all usually have styles associated with them. And I'll probably do another video at some point breaking down, like for instance, a Star Trek Adventures book, just to show you, a spread on a page and to show you all the little nitty gritty details that have to be looked at before it gets printed and then gets shipped. And I think a lot of gamers probably on some unconscious level understand that there's an incredible amount of things to look at in a book to focus on, but you may not appreciate the totality of the work involved in like looking at a thing. And you're not just looking at the text, right? You're not just looking at the text or the stat blocks. You're looking at everything on the page, on every page, for 128 pages or 200 pages or 240 pages, or in the case of the core books, like 350, 400, 500 pages, depending on your book, right? So it's a lot, and that's all copy editing really is like making sure all those nitty-gritty pieces are in place. And that's why a copy editor really shouldn't be also worrying about the substantive stuff, right? Because like if I'm heads down focused on all the little refinements and all the placement of all the pieces on the page, it's a different brain set. It's a different mindset to be focusing on that versus focusing on the story or the lore or the other material that's being presented in a prose fashion, right? Now, again, fiction's a little different because you generally don't have to worry about headers and footers, and for the most part, the text is just a straight flow on the book, right? You don't have to worry about a lot of stuff on the page because it's just text for the most part. Whereas with a nonfiction book or a game book, you've got artwork, you've got sidebars, you've got all kinds of stuff going on the page to make it cool and pretty looking, and you're not relying on just the text to get the point across. You've got everything going on, right? But again, copy editing is you're looking at you're doing a deep dive and you're looking at all the different components that are going to be associated with that manuscript, turning it into a complete produced thing. All right, so that's editing. I hope that makes sense. Certainly, I forgot to tell you to like and subscribe and click the bell button and everything. Any questions on any of this stuff, just drop it down in the comments. We'll talk about it. And then if I need to clarify, I can do another video at some point. But that's editing, in a what 20 minutes. Um, again, from big picture to way down in the weeds, looking at literally every technical thing that's on the page. So that's editing. That's editing as I understand it. Again, your definitions may be different. The people you know may have different definitions. There may be a lot of blurring in between the lines here. Like, I've seen plenty of editors who work where they just do a total edit on a manuscript, and they're doing a little bit of substantive editing, they're doing a little bit of line editing, they're doing a little bit of copy editing. It's all kind of blending together into this huge comprehensive workload, which is fine, right? I mean, that's fine if that's what you're paying for, and you and the writer and you and the editor have agreed that's what you want. Great, sure, go for it. But if you're looking for more specific, detailed levels, at, not surprisingly, at different price points, it's worth it to have just create some sort of common vocabulary between yourself and your editor, so that you know what you're getting into before you start handing money over and manuscripts over and start getting into the weeds on time and stuff. Then we get to proofreading. Now, proofreading, I guess I'm a bit of a traditionalist where proofreading is literally proofreading. I have a proof of something, and when I say proof, I mean you've got your manuscript, and then that manuscript turns into an InDesign document, or it turns into a layout document, or it turns into something that looks different than the manuscript, because that proof is going to eventually go and be produced and become a print book or a digital book or an ebook or something else. But it's fundamentally different than the manuscript, because the manuscript might be a Word document, it might be a Google document, it might be Scrivener. It has a very different look and feel to it, right? It's not just, it might just be pages with text on it, but it might have other stuff on it. But so going from manuscript to proof, you actually have a proof. It's something. It's either tangible, like a piece of paper, like I get from the factories when they send me the digital proofs, or it might be a PDF, or digital proof that you can see what it might look like once it gets printed. But either way, you've got your manuscript, whether it's in print or digital, right? It might be a Word document, or it might be a printed document. I mean, I'm sure plenty of people still use print. For me, I'd like to save the environment, and I don't like having a billion pieces of paper everywhere. And plus, I'm getting old, so it's harder for me to read my own handwriting. So it's just easier for me to edit on screen. But other people, still like to do the traditional hand editing, and gosh, more power to them, because God's bless you for doing hand edits anymore. But so I do all my edits digital. 99 times out of 100. Like, I mean, when I get the physical print proofs, I'll do hand edits on those if I see anything glaring. But proofreading in my head is you've got a manuscript in digital or print format, and you've got a proof in digital or print format. And the proofreader is what they're doing is they're literally, well, this is actually slugging. Let me stop there. Proofreading is you're comparing the manuscript to the proof, or the proof to the manuscript, and you're making sure it's correct, it's accurate. Is everything in that proof what was in the manuscript? If there's a difference, was something in the manuscript accidentally dropped and missed? Did new errors creep into the proof that weren't present in the manuscript? Was there a step somewhere along the way where somebody added more content, and you don't have the actual final manuscript? You have an iterative manuscript, and then somebody came in and added some more stuff. That happens in gaming products sometimes. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but sometimes that's just the reality. Is we can refine certain things in layout differently than we can in manuscript, but that's a whole separate conversation. So proofreading then. So you're going through the proof, and you're making sure that proof has all the content that the manuscript has, and that it's all in the right place. Proofreading is also a matter of checking it against the copy edits, right? So if the copy editor says, make sure the sidebar's over here, make sure the header's here, the footer should read this, the proofreader's got to be making sure that all of that stuff is correctly oriented in the right place. So that's proofreading, and then slugging is really that one-to-one comparison. You're looking at the proof, you're looking at the manuscript. Did I get everything in the manuscript? There's a lot of blur between proofreading and slugging, but slugging is really more about or at least in my experience and in my head, The slugging is where you're looking at the manuscript and you're making sure all that stuff got put into the proof. Um, I see this more frequently in nonfiction and in game writing, where if you have just in this case, Star Trek Adventures, right? Our books and our products have a lot of body text, a lot of sidebars, a lot of quotes, and different sections of the page that are there for different reasons. And when a designer is working in InDesign and they're copying and pasting from the Word document or the Google document or whatever, and they're pasting that text into InDesign, sometimes pieces are missed. Sometimes the designer might, they know that they need to put in several sidebars, so they might, copy paste several sidebars into their InDesign document, make changes, and then start, folding them into the layout. But human error. Sometimes things change, and sometimes they forget to change text, or they don't, or they cut and paste the wrong text into the wrong block, or they just human errors occur. It's not a big deal. It's just that's why we do proofreading and slugging, is to make sure, okay, the sidebar on page 14 should have said this, but it's a copy paste from page 23, so we just need to make sure that the right text is in the right place. So that's slugging, is just going through, A to Z, the manuscript. Does this manuscript match one for one the contents of the proof? If it doesn't, we talk to the editor or writer or project manager or whatever and say, okay, why don't these match, right? And this is especially true for RPG books, where when we get to layout, we discover, oh, we've got half a page of white space, and we can either fill that with more text, or we can fill it with a graphic or something. That's where, like, if I know I've got space to add more text, I'll add more text into the layout that doesn't get reflected in the manuscript. And then when I send it to the proofreader, I try to include a note that says, oh, by the way, in the layout, there are a handful of pages that have additional content. Here's the additional content. You won't see it reflected in the manuscript, but that's because we added it iteratively later, because we're trying to make the layout the latest and greatest, finest version. And the manuscript may not always have all those extra bits and pieces that we didn't discover we needed until we got into layout. Because either our page plan wasn't perfect, or just the nature of laying out a book means that we can play with the margins, and we can play with the technical details. And if we can fit more text, then we'll plug in more text. If it doesn't make sense, then we'll use a graphic or something else. Less of an issue with fiction, although even with fiction, you want to make sure that all your scenes and chapters and paragraphs are correctly copied over. So that's where it's worth it just to do a page through of the proof and of the manuscript, just to make sure, is it all there. One of the tips and tricks I've learned along the way is check the first word, check the last word. If they're the same in both places, you can kind of speed it up a little bit, because when you're proofreading, you're not supposed to be focusing on the line mechanics, right? That's what the copy editor did. So you're hoping by the time you get to proofreading and slugging that the text is right? It's clean, it's perfect, it's where it needs to be. You're not hoping to look at commas or splices or weird stuff like that. You're looking at the making sure it's there, as opposed to, is it right? Again, a lot of wiggle room there, a lot of blurring of lines between copy editing and proofreading. But this is just, again, from my experience, this is where we've been. So slugging is doing the one-for-one comparison, and then proofreading. I guess reading is a bit of a misnomer, but it's checking the proof and making sure that the proof has all those elements that need to be present in there, so that it's a correct, complete product. And so it's a very different skill set to be a proofreader versus an editor, because you're looking at different things. And the same person can do it. I think you just need to give yourself some time and distance away from it, so that you can come at it from a different perspective. There have been plenty of times where I've caught myself doing a slug for somebody, or doing a proofread for somebody, that the menu or the proof clearly hadn't been fully copy edited, or clearly hadn't gone through the rigor of a deep line edit. And I won't flag all the errors, because that's not my job in that moment, right? If I'm proofreading, I'm proofreading, I will certainly flag stuff if I can where I see it and say, I think this should probably be a comma. This should probably be fixed. I won't do it for the whole thing. Like once I do my initial assessment, if it's clear that the manuscript hasn't gotten a full copy edit or line edit, and in my professional judgment, it probably needs one, I would at least flag that for the writer or the project manager and say, hey, I got this manuscript to proofread, but it's not where it needs to be, in my opinion. Are you sure you want me to proofread this as it stands, or do you want to kick it back to editorial? I think being honest and direct is always better than not. And I always want to make sure I'm working on the latest and greatest version of the document before I start messing with it. And sometimes, again, human error creeps in. Someone might send you an older version of a document and go, oh yeah, whoops, I sent you the wrong version. There's version final 17, really truly final, is the one you should be getting, as opposed to final as of today kind of final. Sorry, these things happen. So that's proofreading and slugging. And then just to wrap this up, I know we've been at this for half an hour here. Other things I've noticed that some people call editing that isn't, in my head, really editing, and that's getting someone to look at your manuscript with the specific purpose of looking at it from a sensitivity angle or a diversity angle. Like if you're writing about a culture that you are not of, or a or a gender or sexual orientation or something that you are not of and that you don't have that much familiarity with, you might want to get a sensitivity reader. You might want to get a diversity reader. Some people call that editing or like diversity editing, but it's not really editing because they're not doing the kind of edit that a traditional editor would do. They're looking at it from a different point of view, different perspective, different mindset. So that's just something to be aware of. And then fact checking. Editors are generally very broadly well-read kind of people. Like, we have lots of interests, and I can't speak for all editors, obviously, but I've got a very broad spectrum of interests and hobbies and things that I like, and so I know a little bit about a lot of things, but I know a lot about very specific things. And so as a fact checker, I can be really good at certain topics, but I don't know everything. So if you're going to hire a fact checker expecting them to be an editor, you might be disappointed in the results. But if you're writing a story or a book or something, and you want a subject matter expert for a very specific thing to look at it for that very specific topic, then yeah, hire a fact checker or a subject matter expert to do that. Like, maybe you're writing a police procedural and you want a police officer to review it from their perspective, right? From a police officer legal kind of perspective. Does this feel right? Does this make sense? As a police officer, is this something that you would do or be familiar with? They can help you with that. But if you're sending your police procedural to a line editor, they might in passing know a little bit about law enforcement and how police officers approach things, but they might not. So you can't really rely on them to do that fact checking for you. Fact checking, again, is a different skill set. It would, potentially, depending on your topic, it would require you to find somebody who has the time and you have the money to hire them to do that fact checking for you. So that's just something to be aware of. Fact checking, sensitivity, diversity reading, not really editing in the traditional sense. So anyway, again, I've been at this for 30 odd minutes. I hope this has been useful. Hopefully this isn't just a bunch of hash thrown at you to think about, but do think about, when you approach an editor, think about what specifically are you looking for with your manuscript. Are you looking for that big picture overview of it? Are you looking for a deeper dive into the paragraph and sentence structure? Are you just looking for somebody to compare your manuscript against the layout that you got from somebody or that you put together yourself, and you don't trust yourself to compare one to the other? You don't want to miss something. Maybe you just need a sanity check on your proof or on your slug, something like that. So think about what you need for your manuscript in as much as you can, and then that way, when you're approaching editors or copy editors or proofreaders or whatever, you can talk to them and develop a common frame of reference. Again, a lot of editors and proofreaders have different terms for all this stuff, and it'll be worth it for you to spend time with them to get on the same page. Any questions, of course, hit a comment below, send me an email or something. I've been doing freelance editing and writing for umpteen million years, and there's plenty of other editors and writers out there too. I think to a person. Editors always want the writers to shine. You know, we don't want you to show your whole butt to the world and have a manuscript out there that's not the absolute best you can make it in that moment that you make it, knowing that you're going to get better book after book after book the more you do it. But we're here to help you succeed and be successful, and we're here to help you make your book awesome. And if any editor tells you otherwise, then find someone else who will, because we're here to help you. That's our job, is to make your stuff better, right? Or at least to make the presentation of it clean, easy, so someone can read it and go, oh yeah, this is a great read. I didn't stumble over any of the punctuation or any of the words. The flow made sense. A led to B led to C. I get it. Good stuff. So anyway, editors, proofreaders, we're here to help you be awesome, and just work with us. You know, talk to us about what you need, and we'll go from there. So hopefully this was useful. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate you all. Have fun. Write fearlessly, and I'll talk to you all next time. Take care, everybody.